Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav. We're continuing to learn the halachos of the Daled Minim, and specifically we have been learning the halachos of the Esrog. We're going to be learning today Mir Hashem Daf Kuf Yud Ches Amid Beis. We pick up on the top line of Kuf Yud Ches Amid Beis in SIman Tov Reish Mem Ches Sif Yud Daled. Says the Mechaber, Im also by Chazazis Be'inyan sheposel. If the Esrog develops a chazazis condition, so if you remember, we've been learning about these chazazis, the appearance of some kind of blisters or boils or scabs on the Esrog, but these are raised blemishes on the Esrog that mar the appearance of the Esrog. Or, says the Mechaber, if the Esrog has the appearance of being spotted because it has discolorations in different areas on the Esrog. So the Mechaber says it is possible to peel these blemishes off of the Esrog and make the Esrog kosher. The Mechaber says, Im kisha kolfoi, if you were to peel off these blemishes, chayzer lamare ha'esrog, if you would peel off these blemishes underneath where you removed the blemishes, the Esrog would look kemare ha'esrog, it would look normal, it would look like a normal Esrog. Then, says the Mechaber, kosher, then the Esrog is kosher, la'akar sheniklaf, after you peel it. The Ramah seems to be saying over here, don't think that what the Mechaber is saying is that if it would be possible to peel the blemishes off the Esrog, and in the places where you peeled it, you know that it would look kemare esrog, then the esrog is kosher even if you do not peel them. That's not what the Mechaber is saying. The Mechaber is saying that if you had these blemishes and you peeled the blemishes off, and in the places where you peeled the esrog, it's chayzer kemare esrog, it looks like a normal esrog, la'achar sheniklaf, after you do in fact peel the blemishes off, the esrog is kosher if v'loy chosar klum, if the esrog is not chosar. So in other words, what the Mechaber is telling you over here is, it's possible to go peel the blemishes off the esrog, and it's possible for the esrog to be kosher. But in order for this to work, you need a couple of things. You need, first of all, that when you peel the blemishes off, after you peel the esrog, it's chayzer kemare esrog. It looks normal, it's a normal color, and it looks like the esrog, and we'll see what that means in the Mishnah Berurah. And also, it can't be chosar. Now, what does that mean that it can't be chosar? So we learned earlier in Sif Vav, on Kuf Tez Zayin Amid Beis, we learned earlier in Sif Vav, Niklaf haklipa hachitzayna shaloi. If you peel off the outermost thin, very thin layer of the peel of the esrog, and you don't remove anything lower than that, then the esrog is not considered chosar, because that outermost peel is not considered part of the guf of the esrog. So if you peel off just that outermost peel, and it still looks yellow, so again that's chayzer kemare ha'esrog, then the esrog is not chosar, and then the esrog could be kosher. Let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah here. Mishnah Berurah Eiskat Nun Aleph. Be'inyan sheposel. The Mechaber started off and he said, this whole conversation is nogeya if the esrog developed a chazazis in a way that if you leave the esrog alone, the esrog is going to be posel. Be'inyan sheposel, says the Chavetz Chaim, bein shahaya berubai, the esrog would be posel. For example, let's say you have roiv of the esrog covered by a chazazis condition, then we learned that the esrog is posel. Oy b'miyutai, or the esrog could also be posel, we learned, even if the chazazis only covers a miktsas, only a minority of the area of the esrog, but it's become a mekaimos, but it's spread out amongst a lot of the esrog, so that the area that has the chazazis encompasses roiv of the esrog. If you remember, we spoke about if you take a thread and you encompass all the chazazis with a thread, if the area encircled by the thread would be more than Rov of the Esrog, that would render the Esrog puzzle. The Kalaf Kol Mekayimai Sapsulin, and now you want to make the Esrog kosher. So what you did is, you went ahead and you peeled off all of the problematic areas on the Esrog. All of the areas that have these blemishes, you went and you peeled them off. Says the Mishnah Berurah Katan Nun Beis, kosher, you could render the Esrog kosher. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Va'afilu lechatchila yesh la'achshiroi al yedei kain. Says the Mishnah Berurah, this is not a b'di'evet. This could even be a lechatchila. If you have these types of blemishes and you want to make the Esrog a kosher Esrog, lechatchila, you could go ahead and do this, and it would be a lechatchila dik a kosher Esrog. Not necessarily would it be the most muvchar Esrog. You could probably find an Esrog that's nicer than this one, but it's lechatchila, it's not b'di'evet. Eis Katan Nun Gimel. Another condition that's required in order for the Esrog to be kosher is v'loy chasar klum. It has to be that the Esrog is now not going to be chasar. Tahainu, this means, explains the Chavetz Chaim, shaloi kolaf bimenu rak klipa hachitzayna hadaka. In order for the Esrog to be considered not chasar, after you go ahead and you peel something off it, it has to be that you only peeled off the very thin outermost layer, not what's underneath it. Because if you go deeper than that, and now the Esrog is chasar, even a kol shehu, and afilu rak b'makom echad, and even if it's only a kol shehu, even on one spot on the Esrog, pasal l'deya harishayna le'el b'sif beis, the Esrog would be pasal, according to the first opinion that we learned in Sif Beis, where we saw that an Esrog that's chasar kol shehu, an Esrog that's missing even a tiny speck of the Esrog, if you removed something, it is considered chasar. The Deya Rishayna said it's pasal. The Deya Shniya said that you could be missing up to the size of an isar, up to the size of an isar coin. But the Deya Rishayna said even a kol shehu, and we learned in the Mishnah Berurah that when machmer like the Deya Rishayna. We're going to see later on that the Ramah might be chaylik on this. Okay, so that's if you're Dalit. So again, you have these problematic blemishes on the Esrog. You want to peel them off. And the Mechaber is telling us, theoretically, you could peel off the problematic areas if you only remove the very outermost layer. And now the Esrog is no longer discolored, and the areas that you peeled off are still yellow or greenish, so they're chayzer kemare Esrog. They look like the rest of the Esrog, and since you only removed that outer layer, the Esrog is not chasar. It could be kosher, and we said that this is even a lechatchila. This is not a b'di'evet. Now, there's an interesting biur halacha here. Biur halacha dibra hamaschel im kishakolfai kosher. Chavetz Chaim brings down, I am the Mishnah Berurah. He says, take a look at what I wrote in the Mishnah Berurah. Da'afilu lechatchila mutter. That it's even lechatchila to do this, but you should know the kasav of Pri Megadim. The Pri Megadim writes, it would not be mutter to peel the Esrog in order to render it kosher on Yom Tov itself. Why not? To heavy misakid, because this would be a problem of tikud moneh. This would be similar to what we saw earlier when you have the hadas that has the berries on it. You're not allowed to pick the berries off of the hadas in order to make the hadas kosher, because that's tikkun moneh, it's makeh b'patish. You're taking an Esrog that's not usable and you're being misakin it. That's a malacha on Shabbos and Yom Tov. So to over here, you can't peel the Esrog and make the Esrog kosher. That would be misakin moneh. Kemosha also lilkait anve hadas b'Yom Tov. Okay, now we go to Sif Tezvav. Nafal olav mayim betolush. Let's say water fell on the Esrog. I almost had this problem this year. I picked up my Esrogim. I had a box of Esrogim for my whole family. I had them on my desk in my study, and then something happened upstairs over my study, and there was a leak, and the water came raining down on my box of Esrogim. Baruch Hashem, I caught it right away. Siyata d'shmaya. It was a very big siyata d'shmaya. I was about to go upstairs to go to bed, and I remembered I left something on my desk. I went back downstairs. I came to my desk. I saw water pouring onto the desk. Right away, I moved the desk. I removed the Esrogim. I moved my Svarim. I moved my laptop. And Baruch Hashem, everything was fine. I took the esrogim out of the boxes. I made sure everything was dry and everything was fine. But the Mechaber says here at Sif Tezvav, Nafal alav mayim b'talush. If water fell on the esrog after the esrog was already removed from the tree. Of course, water falls on the esrog while it's growing on the tree all the time. It rains and it gets wet. That's okay. The fruit does not rot on the tree from getting wet. But once it's betalush, once it's already disconnected from the tree, now if it gets wet, that wetness could cause the fruit to rot. So nafal alav mayim betalush, v'tafach, and the esrog swells from becoming wet. Oy sarach, or it begins to rot. Oy, or shehu kavush b'chaimetz. Or let's say you take an esrog and you soak it in vinegar. Kind of you're pickling it. Oy mevushel, or you cook an esrog. Oy menummer, or you have an esrog that is spotted with discolorations. In all of these cases, the Mechaber says these esrogim are puzzle. Let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah, Katan Nun Dalet. Kavush b'chaimetz. So we have over here, the Mechaber told us, when is the esrog going to be puzzle? If it's pickled in chaimetz. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Hainu, the point of the Mechaber, when he mentions pickling in chaimetz, pickling in vinegar, is debazeh. In this case, where you're soaking the esrog in vinegar, afilu lo shaha el kidei sheyarsiach. Even if you only leave the esrog in the vinegar for the amount of time it would take the vinegar to boil up. So you take an esrog and you put an esrog into a little pot of vinegar. Now, after how long of the esrog soaking in the vinegar does it become a problem? The shear is kidei sheyarsiach. How long would it take to boil that pot up? That's how long it takes for it to become a problem, that now it's considered a kavush esrog. It's considered pickled in chaimetz. And the problem over here is because we know the rule that kavush harezeh kimavushel. When something is pickled, in halacha, that's akin to as if it was cooked. V'hu adin. However, the Mishnah Berurah points out that kisheshara b'mayim oy b'shar mashkin udvash, if you were to soak an esrog in other beverages, in other liquids, or in dvash, in honey, me'es la'es, and you would soak it for 24 hours, kaibala dehevi kimavushel. So what the Mishnah Berurah is pointing out is, the Mechaber told us over here two cases. He told us one case of kavush, where you went ahead and you pickled it in chaimetz. So the Mechaber said dafka vinegar. He didn't mention if you soak it in a different beverage for 24 hours, or you soak it in honey for 24 hours. Points out to Mishnah Berurah that would also be problematic, because the rule of kavush harezeh kimavushel applies to when something is soaked in a liquid, me'es la'es, for a 24-hour period, no matter what the liquid is. The point of chaimetz is more chamor than any other beverage, because chaimetz, it becomes problematic even quicker. It becomes problematic after the time span of kidei sheyarsiach, the amount of time it would take to boil it up. Ois katan on hay, oy menummer, or if the esrog is spotted, yesh oimrim dedavke imhu menummer begivonin hapesulin. The Mishnah Berurah says there are those that say, and he brings this down from the Ran, that this problem of menummer, the problem of a spotted esrog, is only applicable if the discolored areas are a color that would render an esrog puzzle, like black or white. Kigain chazazis, if it's the color of a chazazis, a shachar, or it's black, a lavan, or it's white, a yaroy ki'isvei asadeh, if it's a dark green, like the grass. These are all halachos that we're going to see shortly in Sif Tezayin, of these problematic colors. But there are those that say, even if the esrog has a spotted appearance, because it has all sorts of different colors on it, but those colors are colors that do not normally render an esrog puzzle. Gam kein al kol panim eina b'klal hadar. Still and all, since now you have an esrog that's a whole spotted esrog, it's got all sorts of different colors on it. It's not hadar, it's not a pre-eitz hadar, u'pasel, and the esrog would be pasel. So again, we have two shittas over here. We have the sheet of the Ran that says, when is mechzikim and numar a problem? When is it a problem if the esrog has a lot of different colors on it? Only if those colors are bad colors. If they're colors that normally render an esrog puzzle. But if they're colors where an esrog would be perfectly kosher, then even if there's a lot of different colors and a lot of different areas being different colors, that's okay. That's not going to render the esrog puzzle. That's the first opinion. The second opinion is even if it's colors that are normally okay. Since the bottom line is now you have a spotted esrog, that alone takes away from the hadar of the esrog and its puzzle. And concludes the Mishnah Berurah, and he says, "V'hatam b'chol zeh," the reason for all of these psulim listed over here in Sif Tezvav of Nafalo, of Mayim, and Tofach, and Sarach, and Kavish B'chaimis, and Mavushal, and Menumar. The problem with all of these is Mishum de'enoi hadar, because in all of these cases you end up with an esrog that is not hadar. Okay, let's go back to the Mechaber, 3 lines down near the end of the line, Sif Tezayim. Imhu shachar, if the esrog is black, or lavan, or it's white. So if it's b'makom echad, if there's one contiguous area that's black or white, paisel berubai, that will passel the esrog if the discoloration is taking up the majority of the esrog. Bishnayim or b'shloisha mekaymis, if these discolorations are taking place in 2 or 3 different places on the esrog, then dinoi kachazazis, then the same halacha that we saw earlier by the chazazis applies lipasel afilu b'miyutai, where it could passel the esrog even if the discolorations are only covering a miktsas, a minority of the esrog. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cotton and vav b'shtayim or b'shloisha b'kaimais. He sends us back ayin le'el b'sif yud. He sends us to kuf yud zayin and beis to sif yud, where we learned over there by the chazazis. We had 2 different opinions by the chazazis. We had one opinion that said that chazazis could passel an esrog if it's in 2 or 3 areas. That's only if those chazazises are spread out over the majority of the esrog, so that if we encircle them, we're going to encircle rive of the esrog. We had another opinion that said no, even if 2 or 3 chazazis are only spread out over a clear minority, they're only on a minority of one side of the esrog, still in all the esrog would be puzzle. The Mishnah Berurah over here says the same halacha as we had in Sif Yud would apply to these discolorations, these black or white discolorations on the esrog. Okay, now we go to Sif Yud Zayin. Sif Yud Zayin is a very interesting little sif, not very complicated, but I want to give you the background to Sif Yud Zayin. We have a Mishnah in Sukkah on Lamed Daled Amid Beis. The Mishnah gives us a whole list of Esrogim that are puzzle. And the Mishnah says, Esrog hakushi puzzle. A kushi esrog is puzzle. What's an esrog hakushi? Rashi says over here, hakushi, sheba me eretz kush, it comes from the land of Kush, v'shacharhu, and it's black. It's naturally black. It's a black esrog. Says the Mishnah, okay, esrog hakushi puzzle. This black kushi esrog is puzzle. Now, many of you are thinking, black esrog, who ever heard of a black esrog? The truth is, it's not such a stretch. We know that there are many types of fruits that come in a whole variety of colors. I mean, the most simple example is an apple. There are green apples, red apples, yellow apples, gold apples. We know apples come in all sorts of colors. Figs come in all sorts of colors. Olives, we have green olives, black olives. There are a lot of fruits that come in a whole wide variety of colors. So, apparently there were esrogim. There are greenish yellow esrogim, and then there are esrogim that come in Eretz Kush that are black esrogim. So the Mishnah tells me over here, esrog hakushi, puzzle. Okay, now, problem is that on Daf Lamid Vav, Amid Aleph, the Gemara brings down a brisa. Gemara says like this, Amar, we said in the Mishnah, esrog kushi puzzle. A kushi esrog, a black esrog is puzzle. Frak Gemara Tanya, we learned that a brisa, kushi kosher. A kushi esrog is kosher. So we have a straight out contradiction here between the Mishnah. The Mishnah says that esrog kushi is puzzle, and here we have a brisa that says esrog kushi kosher. That's one problem. Then we have a next line in the brisa. The next line in the brisa says doimel kushi, an esrog that's similar to a kushi. Puzzle is puzzle. Okay, so what do we have so far? We have a Mishnah that says esrog kushi is puzzle. We have a brisa that says esrog kushi is kosher. And then we have another esrog. We have an esrog that's doimel kushi. The esrog that's doimel kushi, the brisa says is kosher. Is puzzle, right? Yeah, the brisa says doimel kushi, similar to a kushi esrog, is puzzle. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to solve the contradiction. We want to reconcile the Mishnah and the brisa. So the Gemara has different ways of reconciling them. We paskin according to Rava. Rava says loy kasha, the stira between the Mishnah and the brisa is not shver. Halon v'halahu. This is for us and this is for them. Okay, what does that mean? What that means is, well, let's see the Rambam. We have a Rambam. The Rambam says like this. The Rambam says, Makaim shaha esrogim shalahem ke'ein shecharois mu'uta. In the regions and the locales where the esrogim are naturally slightly black, shecharois mu'uta, they are slightly black. They're blackish. In the regions where the esrogim are blackish, kisherim, those esrogim are kosher in those regions. V'im hayu shecharim b'yoser, but if the esrogim are mamish black, ka'adam kushi, like a kushi person, dark like a real kushi person, hareza pasal b'chal makayim, that is puzzle no matter where you use such an esrog. Now, if you look at the Magid Mishnah on the Rambam over there, the Magid Mishnah tells us that the Rambam was learning the Gemara on Daf Lamed Vav. He was learning the Mishnah on Lamed Daled Lamed Beis, and the Brisa and the Gemara on Lamed Vav Lamed Aleph, like the Rif, where the Rif explains like this. The Rif says, we have an entry in the Brisa that says that an esrog that's doimel kushi, an esrog that's similar to a kushi, is puzzle. Says the Rif, you know what that means? That means an esrog that is black, like a truly black individual. A person who is a very dark complexion. So that means a real black esrog. The Rif says, the Bryce is telling us, doimel kushi. If the esrog is a true black, if it's dark black, that esrog is puzzle. Why is it puzzle? Because it's not hadar. On an esrog, that is not considered beautiful. A black esrog is not considered a beautiful esrog. Different colors are considered beautiful on an esrog. But on an esrog, the dark black color is not considered beautiful, and that's why the Brisa says doimel kushi. If it's similar to a kushi, that means a kushi individual, a human kushi, that esrog is puzzle. So that takes care of the Brisa that says doimel kushi is puzzle. A true black esrog is puzzle no matter where you are, whether you're in Eretz Kush, whether you're in Bavel, whether you're in Eretz Yisrael, whether you're in New York. If you import a true black esrog, that esrog is going to be puzzle. Now we have the stira between the Mishnah and the Brisa. The Brisa said esrog hakushi is puzzle. Says Rava, halon v'halahu. For us in Bavel, the Brisa that says that an esrog hakushi is kosher, excuse me, halon, that's for us in Bavel. In Bavel, a blackish, not a true black esrog, that's doimel kushi, but a slightly black esrog. Like the Rambam said, shchayros meuta, if it's slightly blackish. So for us, says Rava, for us in Bavel, a slightly blackish esrog is kosher. Why? Because in Bavel, that's the way the esrogim were. In Bavel, esrogim were blackish, and therefore it's not a problem of hadar. That's the way esrogim grow here. That's what people are used to. Halahu. But the Mishnah is talking about in Eretz Yisrael. In Eretz Yisrael, even a slightly blackish esrog is puzzle. Why? Because in Eretz Yisrael, esrogim aren't black. In Eretz Yisrael and in the environs of Eretz Yisrael, esrogim are greenish yellow. You show somebody a black esrog, that's not hodar. What kind of esrog is that? That's not hodar. So in Eretz Yisrael, it would be puzzle. So here we have the Mishnah that says esrog akushi puzzle. It's talking about an Eretz Yisrael, where a slightly black esrog is not hodar. The Brisa that says esrog akushi is kosher, that's in Bavel. In Bavel, there's an expectation to have a blackish esrog, so it's not a lack of hodar. The Brisa that says doimel akushi is puzzle means a true black esrog anywhere, because that's not considered hadar anywhere. Incidentally, there is a very nice Dirshu footnote. I don't have my Dirshu Mishnah Berurah handy, but I did notice a nice Dirshu footnote that takes from this raid over here. He discusses the concept of hadar. What does hadar depend on? What do I mean? Is beauty in the eye of the beholder? The way I just described it to you, it sounds like beauty is in the eye of the beholder. If you're in Bavel, so that we have an expectation of a blackish esrog. So a blackish esrog is not a lack of hadar. In Eretz Yisrael, we don't have blackish esrogim. You see a blackish esrog, that doesn't seem to be hadar. If it doesn't look hadar to the Bnei Eretz Yisrael, then it's not hadar. There are those, however, who want to say no. And I think the Chazon Ish is among them. Hadar has nothing to do with the expectations and the likes and the dislikes of people. Hadar is whatever the Chachamim said. The Chachamim, on Daf Lamed Vav Amud Aleph, decreed that in Eretz Yisrael, hadar is greenish yellow. In Bavel, hadar could be blackish. It doesn't matter what people think. It doesn't matter what people like. It doesn't matter what people dislike. Hadar is nitan b'yad Chachamim. Whatever the halacha decrees to be hadar, that's hadar. It's a very interesting footnote. Okay, so now let's see this inside. Says the Mechaber Sif Yud Zayin. Makaim sha'esrogim shalahem ke'ein shechayros ma'at. In regions where it's natural for the esrogim to be slightly blackish, kisherim, those esrogim are kosher. V'im hayu shchayrim b'yoser, but if they're totally black, ka'adam kushi, like a kushi individual, harei zeh pasal b'chol makaim, that esrog is pasal everywhere because that is not beautiful for an esrog. Says the Mishnah Berurah Katan Nun Zayin, makaim aval b'shar mekaimos. But in different regions, the Mechaber said, in a region where it's natural for the esrogim to be slightly blackish, over there such an esrog is kosher. But anywhere else, if you export that esrog to a different locale, where that locale esrogim are not slightly blackish, avo b'shar b'kaimos, afilu b'shachar ma'at pasel, then even a slightly blackish esrog would be pasel. Umashma, and the Mishnah Berurah says the implication over here is afilu heim smuchin lohen. Even if you're talking about a region, an area that's close by to that area where they have blackish esrogim, it doesn't help. Ais katan un ches kisherim. In those areas where they have slightly blackish esrogim, those esrogim would be kosher. Explains the Chavetz Chaim why. Because that's normal. V'lo nafik b'klal hadar. And it does not take away from the hadar characteristic of the esrog. Okay, Sif Yud Ches. He'agoil kikadur. An esrog that's round like a ball. Puzzle, the Mechaber says it's puzzle. Says the Mishnah Berurah Katan Nun Tes, he'agoil kikadur puzzle. An esrog that's round like a ball is puzzle. She'ein darko liyos came. Because that's not the gidul of an esrog. So it's not, doesn't look like an esrog. That's not the way an esrog is supposed to be. Now, if you take a look at Sharetzia and Ois Katan Samachei, the Chavetz Chaim says milashon zeh mashma, from this language of the Levush, from this language, mashma l'chayra, the implication is the lo yeheve b'chlal esrog. The esrog that's kikadur, an esrog that's round like a ball, is pashut. It looks like a different species. So it's not b'chlal esrog. That's not what we call an esrog. Even though factually it is an esrog fruit, but that's not considered an esrog in the context of the halachos of esrog. V'imkeinu pasal b'chol hayamim. And if that's the case, then that esrog would be pasal for the entirety of Yom Tov, right? Because it's not an esrog. You can't use something that's not an esrog even on the rest of Yom Tov, even not on the first day. Avalanias taiti efshaloimar. However, the Chavetz Chaim says, in his humble opinion, it is possible to say ta'atamu mishum she'ena hodar, that in reality the problem of the esrog that's round like a ball is that it's not hodar. Well, if he's according to this, laharambam v'siyatoi kosher b'shar yomin. According to the Rambam, who holds that an esrog that's not hodar is kosher for the rest of Yom Tov, it's only possible on the first day. It could be that this esrog would be kosher for the rest of Yom Tov. We'll see this a little bit weiter. Okay. Now we go to Sif Yud Tes. Says the Mechaber, Gidloi badefus. Let's say what you did was, you have an esrog tree, and you have the little baby immature esrog is beginning to grow. And what you do is, you take a form, you take like a mold, and you box the esrog in to this form. Excuse me. You box the esrog into this form so that as the esrog grows, it should take on the shape of the form. Gidloi batfus, says the Mechaber. V'asoi kimin birya acheres. And what you did was, you made the form a shape that is an unnatural shape for an esrog. So let's say you made a form that's a cube. So now as the esrog grows, it fills up your cube, and you end up with an esrog that's a cube, with a pitam on top and an uketz on bottom. That's not a natural shape for an esrog. So the Mechaber says, Gidloi batfus, you had the esrog grow in a form, v'asoi kimin birya acheres, and you had it grow into a shape that is not natural to an esrog. It looks like a different kind of birya, like a different kind of species. Puzzle, that esrog would be puzzle. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut samach. Gidloi batfus. Hainu, what does this mean? Sha'asaloi tfus, you made a form for the esrog. Ba'oidai katan, while it was still small, u'mechor be'ilan, and attached to the tree. Kedei sheyigdal, so that it should grow, lefi midas hatfus utmunasai, according to the measurements, according to the size of the form and the shape of the form. So, if you made it an unnatural shape for an esrog, the Mechaber said the esrog is going to be puzzle. Continues the Mechaber 3 lines up from the bottom. But asoi k'moi biryasoi. But if you made it the shape of the esrog, so if you made it the shape of the esrog, why did you make a form? You exaggerated the shape of the esrog. So you always had in your mind a dream of the perfect esrog. You wanted an esrog with a beautiful gidl, maybe with a little gartel. You wanted really nice blitos and charitzos, those lines of bumps. My esrog is getting a little long in the tooth over here, so it's starting to shrivel up. But the lines of the bumps, the hills and valleys of the esrog. So you want an esrog with very clear lines of blitos and charitzin, and you want a perfect, beautiful gidl. So you went ahead and you made a form, and you boxed in the esrog on the form, so the esrog should take that form. But it's going to take the form of an esrog, but it's going to be a very exaggerated esrog. Says the Mechaber, asoi k'moi briosoi, as long as it's a shape that is natural to the esrog, af al pi she'asoi dapin, even if you made it dapin, literally dapin means columns or boards. What you did was you made the lines of the blitos and the charitzos so exaggerated that it's like, high mountains and deep valleys. And it looks, the Mefarshim say, like the paddle wheel of a mill. The paddle wheel of a mill has like boards sticking out that the water hits, right? So you made the esrog like flaps almost. So afal pisha asoy dapin, kosher. It's still kosher because even though it's exaggerated, it is the shape of an esrog. It's a natural shape for an esrog. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut in Samach Aleph. Afal pisha asoy dapin. Hainu ke'ein shoysim galgal rechayim, like they make the wheel of a mill. Shalmayim afilu achi chashuv shaper tzirasai. But that is still and all considered the shape of an esrog. Okay. Sev chaf hatiyoim, the twinned esrog. Tiyomis are twins. Hatiyoim, the twin esrog. Dahainu, that is, shegodel shnayim devukim ze bozeh. You have a double esrog, and the esrog grew that way. It grew as a double esrog, and we'll see what that means in a moment. Kosher, the esrog is kosher. Says the Mishnah Berurah Samach Bey, shtayim devukim ze bozeh. It looks like two esrogim that are connected one to the other. Besefer ha'aruch, says the Mishnah Berurah that in the Sefer ha'aruch, B'Shem Rabbeinu Hai, in the name of Rabbeinu Hai Goyen, it says, Hatyoim sha'amru, this esrog hatyoim, this twin esrog that we're speaking of, shnei panim heim. There are two ways that it can grow. Shnayim devukim bibriyasan, we can have two that were attached to each other from the time that they were created, from the time that they grew. I'm going to use my almost non-existent artistic abilities to give you an idea of what this would look like. Bear with me for 1 second. Here we have an esrog hatyoim. It's a double esrog. Here you have the kind of the shape of one side of an esrog. Here you have the other side of the esrog. You have a pitam on top here. You have a pitam on top here. You have two uktzim on the bottom. So here you have one version of a twin esrog. Shtayim dvukim bibriyasan. It's two esrogim attached to each other side by side. Side means twins. The echad, but then there's another possibility of this esrog hatyoim, which is shehu shnei chatza'in chalukin milamala. It's two halves of an esrog that are split on top, umechubarin milamata kolshu, but they're slightly attached on the bottom. And by that, what he means is this. Here we have, here in this picture, let me get the light out of there. In this picture, it looks much more like two esrogim. Just they're slightly attached right over here near the bottom. So the chalukin melamala, they're split at the top, and they're a little bit attached near the bottom. But that looks much more like two separate esrogim that somehow grew together or got stuck together. In any case, the Sefer HaAruch says, in the name of Rabbeinu Hai, that this esrog hatyoim could be either one of those. Ais cut and samach gimel kosher. The bottom line is this is kosher. Kevin shedivru shnayim yachad, since they were created this way, two attached, udvukin, umuurin zebazeh, and they're mixed with each other, she'ein adam yachal lahafridan, in a way that you cannot separate them. They are one peri. Pri echad karina bay, that is called one fruit. So it's a pri eitz hadar. Ve'ein boy mishur taisafais. And there's no problem of Bal Tosef. You see, if it would be considered two separate esrogim, you're not allowed to take a lulav, hadassim, aravas, and two esrogim. That would be Bal Tosef. You're not allowed to do that. But over here, this is not considered two esrogim. It's called one esrog, because that's the way it was created. V'ayin b'Beis Yosef sha'asmag psaloi. You take a look at the Beis Yosef, the smag says this is puzzle, and there are various reasons given, either the Bal Tosef reason or the reason that it's not hadar. And therefore, the Mishnah Berurah says certainly, if possible to get a different esrog, we should get a different esrog. Okay. Sif Chaf Aleph, a very interesting sif, and a very negeya sif. Says the Mechaber, Hayoroik, an esrog that's green. Well, we've all seen green esrogim, and many of us have used green esrogim. Hayoroik, an esrog that's green. It's so green, it's the dark green. It's green like the grass of the earth. Puzzle, that esrog is puzzle. Don't jump at me. It's puzzle. It says the Mechaber, Ella, if not, Ella im kein chayzer lamare esrog kosher kishamashinoisai. Unless we know that if we let this esrog sit, it will turn to a normal esrog color. It will turn from green to yellow. So again, what did the Mechaber say? You have a dark green esrog, that esrog is possible, unless you know that if you let it sit, it's going to turn yellow and it's going to turn to an esrog color. What's going on here? Says the Mishnah Berurah cut in Samach Dalet, shedoimel isvei asada. If the esrog is a dark green like the grass, it's possible. Why? Explains the Mishnah Berurah, mishum shebazeh nikar shaloi nigmar hapri adayin. Why is the esrog green? Because it's immature. It's unripened. Now, the problem with that is that the pasuk says, "Ulekachtem lochem pri eitz hadar." You should take a beautiful peri, a beautiful fruit. Now, from the fact that the pasuk says pri, that means that it's a nigmar hapri. It has to be a finished fruit. It can't be an unripe fruit. It has to be a ripened fruit. So if it's green, it's immature, it's not nigmar hapri. You can't use it. But there's a catch, explains the Mishnah Berurah. Umashma, the implication is, dim loy hayoyore kolkach kosher. If it's not so green, it's only possible if it's green ki isvei asada. That's a dark green. But if it's not so dark, the implication is that it's kosher. Why, says the Mishnah Berurah? The mistama nigmar period. If it's green, but it's not such a dark green, then it is nigmar period. That means that it's not an unripe, it's not an immature. I don't want to use the word unripe, and you'll see why in a moment. It's not an immature fruit. What do I mean? Let's go to the next sifkat in the Mishnah Berurah. The Mechaber said, Ela im kein chayzer. There's a caveat. If the esrog is green, but you know that this esrog will turn yellow eventually, doesn't even say when it's going to turn yellow. Maybe it's going to turn yellow a week after Yom Tov. But if you know that the esrog is going to turn yellow, then it's okay. Now, according to the explanation that I just gave you of the problem of a green esrog, why is this okay? If the problem with the green esrog is that it's not nigmar period, and since it's not nigmar period, we cannot say ulekachtem lechem pri eitz hadar. So then how does it help if I know that it's going to change colors? Right now, it's not nigmar period. And we just saw in the previous Mishnah Berurah, the Mishnah Berurah said that if it's green, but it's not very green, it's okay. Why is it okay? The mistama nigmar period. What do you mean? It's still green, so it's not ripe yet. So I'll tell you what's at play over here. Let's read further in the Mishnah Berurah. Mishnah Berurah says it's in Eiskat and Samachay. Ritzaynai loymar. What the Mechaber wants to say is, Heicha diadinon teva ha'esrogim sheba oisay moker. When you know that it's the nature of these esrogim, shedarkon lachsar achar kach lamare esrog, that they will in fact turn to the regular color of an esrog, la'achar shesho b'kli zman meruba. You know that these type of esrogim, if you put it in an esrog box and you leave it for a month, it's gonna turn yellow. Then afilu ba'oida yaroik kosher. Then it's kosher even while it's green. Why? Because since it will ultimately turn the right color, al korchach nigmar period. That means that it is nigmar period. So I'll tell you what nigmar period means. Nigmar period does not mean ripe. That's why I wanted to stay away from the word ripe. If a yellow esrog is a ripe esrog, and a green esrog is an unripe esrog, then you would not be allowed to use a green, and the problem is you're not allowed to use an unripe esrog, then you wouldn't be allowed to use a green esrog even if you know it's going to turn yellow. What's the difference? Right now, it's not ripe. The problem is not ripe and unripe. The problem is when the esrog is nigmar period, if the esrog stayed on the tree long enough that it's, I'm going to borrow the term that we use for a baby, it's a full-term esrog. It's an esrog that stayed on the tree long enough, it got from the tree everything it needs, that it's going to become a full-grown, ripened esrog. It might take another month, but it will turn yellow. So it got what it needs from the tree. That's already nigmar period. It's not ripe right now, but it's nigmar period in the sense that it's a fully viable esrog. It is going to fully ripen. Sometimes you have an esrog that was taken off the tree too early. This esrog is just going to rot. It's not going to ripen. It's not a fully developed fruit, so it will not ripen. That esrog you can't use because it's not nigmar period. If it's not going to become a fully viable esrog, if it's not eventually going to turn yellow, you can't use it. It's not a fully viable esrog. It's not a peri. But if it is a fully viable esrog, you know that these esrogim do turn yellow, even if it takes a long time. So it's a fully viable esrog. I could use it right now, even when it's green. The Kevan, Mishnah Berurah Kuf Yotes Amud Aleph, second line down near the end of the line. The Kevan Shechoizer Lamarehu, since it will ultimately turn the proper color, Al Karchach Nigmar Period. That means that it is Nigmar Period. Ubikamokim, nevertheless, says the Chavetz Chaim, Hiskimo HaAchrayim, the Achrayim are in agreement. They list by Chazal Lamaisa. The Lamaisa, it's better not to rely on this. Vein liktois esrogim ela imkein hischal b'miktsas loshuv lamari esrog. You should not purchase an esrog unless it already began, at least, to turn the proper color of an esrog, the shema yia nishar yarok, because there's always a chance that it will remain green. You think that it's going to turn yellow, maybe you are wrong, and maybe it will not. Now, there is a shita of the Bach, the shita Sabach, and you can see this in Sharet Sira's Katan Samach Tes. The shita of the Bach was machmir on this, and he didn't want you to use the green esrog, even if you know that it's going to turn yellow. However, the Sharet Sira says, Harbe Achrayim Deloy Kamach Shemachmir Bazeh. Most Achrayim seem to rule not like the Bach. Okay, even though this Mishnah Berurah continues, it's already on a different topic, and we're already long into the share. So we're going to stop over here, and we'll continue this very lengthy Mishnah Berurah, which is going to take up the majority of tomorrow's share tomorrow. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The source of limud HaTorah should be made in God's Klal Yisrael. The Rebbe Shalom should send Yeshua's refuahs and parnas and shidduchim to all those in need, and we should be zeicher to see the Bias Gal Tzedek b'meher of Yameinu. Amen. Be well.